Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We are so excited to be doing this presentation with you today. We'll be digging into layer 3 routing and some different solutions you might not know about. Can I grab the next slide? Today, we're joined by Robert Lastinger from Distech Controls and Thomas McGee from Optigo Networks. Thanks, guys.
Hi, guys. How are you?
A few housekeeping items really quickly. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to ask away. We have folks in the background who will be able to answer your questions or hold them for the Q&A period at the end. We also have a survey after our webinar that we'd love for you to fill out. This just gives us feedback to know how we can continue to improve on these webinars. And this session is being recorded, so after the webinar, you will receive a link with a recording. You can watch it to your heart's content and share it with your colleagues. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tom and Robert.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Natalie. Hi, everyone. So today what we're going to be looking at is the router, so our layer 3 device. What we'll be looking at is just how this actually affects where it slots into our network and what it does, the kind of functions it takes over. And then we'll be looking at how we can set the system up the standard way. We'll give you a demo of that, how it is when we have a third-party router, and then how it looks when we actually bring in our Optigo router, which will be incorporated into the one view, and how we can configure things from there. We'll give you a demo of that, and then we'll have key comparisons between the two and just the differences between them, and a bit of time for questions and answers and such afterwards as well. So we'll dive straight in. So what we'll first look at here is just our network layers. So on the left we have our OSI model, and on the right we have our TCP IP model. Now you'll see down on the bottom, you're probably more used to, a lot of people here might be more used to seeing the TCP IP model and referring to our network access layer and our internet layer. However, when we're dealing with layer 2 and layer 3 and these terms, when we're saying them, we're usually actually referring to our OSI model. Our layer 2 is our data link, and our layer 3 being our network layer. So here on our network access layer, on the TCP IP model, or our physical and data link layer on the OSI, this is where we have our switches and our routers, and we have our physical wires, and all these connections are doing here. So how we're connecting all our laptops together and how everything can talk to each other. Now, when we actually get into the layer 3, this is where we have our internet layer. This is how we get access to the internet. This is where we get our IP addresses. This is how we're actually able to route. So without the internet, without the IP addresses, we're not going to be able to route and talk amongst different VLANs or talk out to the internet. So that's where we're going to be really focusing on today, on this layer 3 router, and how this new Optigo router incorporated in is just really going to save time and make things a lot simpler, a lot less complex when configuring and managing your network. So we're saying in this layer 3, what exactly are we doing, or what exactly is taken over, what's done here? So the router is the device that's going to be in control or be managing IP addresses. So every time we connect a device and it's going to be connected to a certain VLAN, we're going to have an IP address range that we're going to have on that VLAN. It's going to be able to be issued out to that device. So that device is going to need that for communication onto the internet or to devices on other LANs or other subnets. So it's going to have to manage that. This router is then going to be responsible for allowing communication across VLANs, who is allowed to talk to who, because we can separate these and manage who can have communication. We're going to be able to create local networks, create different VLANs, subnets, and separate them as we like. And then we're going to be able to set up BACnet communications, BACnet over IP. So if we're using BACnet over IP, we're going to require these IP addresses for everything to run. We're going to need this layer 3, this router, third party or Optigo. We're going to require it to be there for these to actually work and all. And there's also DHCP or NAT and many other functions that we can have at our layer 3. So we'll show you how we configure these, how it is going into the GUI itself and going onto these third party or onto the Optigo routers. So in front of us here now, what we're going to be looking at is just a typical network when we're using our layer 2 Optigo. So not incorporating the layer 3, this is when we have a third party router. So in front of us, as we can see here, we have our management VLAN. So we have our NC600, our network controller, and our S8. So our optic fiber aggregation switch. We have these both in our VLAN here. So VLAN 100, our management VLAN. These are connecting down to our switches, which are connecting to our devices here in separate VLANs. So we have VLAN 103 with a range 10.222.103.0 as our network range, our network IP address range. It's going to be our VLAN here. And then we have more devices in 105, so 10.222.105. We're going to show you now that when we jump on and we have our third-party router, how we configure this. So we're going to require this third-party router to allow communication between different VLANs and to provide the IP addresses on these VLANs when these devices are connected. So when we pass over to Robert now, what we look at is how it looks when we configure these up with a third party or a different router on the system connected in.
All right, and that diagram you guys just saw, that is exactly what's in the rack behind me. So I'll show my screen here, hold on. So if you see the rack behind me, that's exactly what's in there right now, is what he showed in the diagram. So 1 second. So Thomas, can you see my screen?
I can indeed, yep.
All right, so if you've watched some of our previous presentations that we've done with Optigo, you've seen this interface before. We don't cover it too in depth, but this is just an example of a third-party layer 3 router. You might have ones that you access via command line or other ones with different GUIs. The focus here is we're just really talking about how complex and involved setting one of these up can be. Depending on your model and your brand, it changes, but they're generally fairly complex. To create the VLANs that you see us using here on this trunk port, so that we can pass these VLANs and use them in Optigo's system, we end up having to create interfaces here and assign them to actual ports or a trunk port to bring them down. And these assignments, while simple enough one by one, can get fairly complex fairly quickly. And there's typically a lot of values. If you're not doing this day to day, or you don't do this as part of your normal job, some of these things can be very difficult to understand what their use cases are, or even if you need them in some cases. Like, so you end up having to read quite a bit and possibly even do some guesswork as to whether or not these values apply to you. In this case, we would have to set up an interface for every single VLAN. And so this interface would allow us to have a DHCP server and have rules on the firewall so that we could route that traffic between the VLANs. So even after setting up all of these interfaces for each one of the VLANs I would need for my job, I would then have to go to the firewall and set rules for these. And regardless of who you're using in a commercial set point, you're going to have rules that need to be set up for traffic to go between your interfaces or your VLANs. So by default, typically they're segregated. So if I wanted to have my VAVs talk with my supervisor, I would need to create rules here, a whole list of them to allow all the ports that I need to communicate with them, whether they're TCP or UDP. And an example of this is, for me to have everything on this VLAN talk to my supervisor, I have a rule set that describes all of these ports. And if I were asking an IT department to do this for me, or an IT guy to do this for me, I would need to supply all of that information to him, because he may not be aware of what we typically use in a controls environment. So he's going to want to know, whether not only all these ports, but he's going to need to know whether they're outbound, incoming, TCP/IP, UDP. Now, of course, you could just say, hey, open up everything, and he could then make a rule to do that. But he still has to create every one of those interfaces. And on every VLAN, he still has to go in and create a rule, at least one or two, to allow for traffic to go between those VLANs. And then on top of that, you still need a DHCP server for each individual VLAN. So if I were to go here and look at my DHCP server, on each one of these networks, if I wanted to set up one for VAVs, I would need to set up a range and all the information. Now, we will be doing this in Optigo's interface, but as you can see here, for each one of these, I have to configure them separately. And I have to go to separate sections of my interface to take care of that. And that's typical of layer 3 routers. You'll find that throughout. And there's a lot of room for error here, since you're individually setting these things up, and there's a lot of advanced options, which we really don't use in a controls world. And in some complex sites, and on sites that have a lot of integration going on, you may actually prefer to use a third-party router. But a typical building where you have a few hundred controllers, and it's just controllers, just a supervisor and, say, Eclipse controllers, you're not going to need the vast majority of options that you would find in an advanced interface like this. So even after setting up all of these DHCP servers for each and every VLAN, and then going back and verifying that the firewall rules are set, then I have to verify that all my interfaces are correct. Now I have to apply those to a trunk port on my switch, so that all of that traffic gets routed to the correct port on the Optigo switch. So there's a tremendous amount of information that needs to be configured correctly, and then and there's a lot of room for human error. So if you're doing this once, and then you decide you have a tenant improvement space, or you're expanding the building, or you have another job in the building, every time you do this, somebody's going to have to come back in and modify these rules and modify any of this to accommodate it. So it's not in a complex scenario, you may need something like this, but on the majority of jobs that we see here at Distech, we feel Optigo has a much easier solution. All right, Thomas, you want to take it over?
Perfect. Or we switch back to, thank you very much.
There we go.
So as Robert just mentioned there, we have some cons, just with it as it can be a bit more complicated and time consuming, does require a bit more support often to manage, especially just the amount of certification required or the amount of skill level required to go in and confidently manage that. As we saw, there's a lot of different things that we can be changing or configuring in there. There is a lot of manual effort. Leaves room for human error when we are repeating things or when we're doing things repetitively. Obviously, if you do something 40 times or if you do it once, there's a lot more chance that you're going to slightly misconfigure one time. And scalability is a lot more tedious in this sort of situation. As Rob showed you there, when you're adding one thing in, we do have to add, we do have to do this in a lot of places, and we do have to make sure we're doing it consistently and accurately. However, that's not always the situation. There's, Rob mentioned there are some times where we might need something a bit more tailored, a bit more specific or complex.
Yeah.
And that's in that situation, we may need to have all these features that are available to us. We may need a lot more complexity, especially in enterprise situations or something like that there, where we have a real tailor fit and we really need something to be quite ingrainedly or kind of specifically configured, as we say. So in that situation, we might need it, but in our OT here, or as Rob's saying, a lot of the situations we come across that we're dealing with here, simplicity is better. And we'll show you how with our system now, we're jumping it in, it really just takes a lot of that complexity and all that confusion out of it. So here in front of us, we're able to see just the same situation, the same setup again, except now, as you can see in the top left, we're having our Optigo router incorporated. So this is going to be taking over this layer 3 functions, the DHCP, and these issuing our IP addresses, our inter-VLAN communication. So it's going to take over this now. We'll just show you how we connect it in and how we actually set it up from scratch when plugging it into the OneView system. So what we're actually looking at is the exact same system here. We've taken it out. All the VLANs and all this are on our NC600. So when we plug this in, you'll be able to see this auto register, it'll auto configure, and we'll be able to push all this configuration out to the router, and very simply we'll have this uploaded. So
it's actually behind, it's in the rack. You can see in the screen share there, or in the video, you see that's the switch in the rack right now, the router, the MikroTik router, and I just took it out of the box and popped it in the rack, and it's ready to go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Rob. So what we'll do is we'll plug ourselves out of the router, we'll plug the existing third-party router out, and we're going to plug our router in. So Rob, whenever you're ready there, would you mind plugging out? So we'll plug ourselves out and we'll connect port 10 of the router into our S8, and I believe we're connecting to port D7 of our S8. So depending on our aggregation switch.
Do you want to bring up the so they can see it live in OneView? Do you have OneView for them?
Jump it up there.
Here we go. So I'm going to plug in. Which one on the S8 would you like me to plug in?
We're going to plug into port D7 on the S8.
Okay, 1 second.
So obviously
right, I've plugged it in. And then on the MikroTik?
We're going to plug into port 10 on the MikroTik.
Okay.
And we have guides that will show, depending on our aggregation switch, which port we're plugging into. And here we see port D7 coming up here. And router state change, as we see auto discovering there. And we should see that pushing that configuration out and auto configuring that. Here we go. As simple as we're seeing this router come online. So you can see it come online in front of us here.
WAN port?
And as you see, we have our WAN is down at the moment, so we're going to have to plug in our WAN and get our DHCP from there. So what we'll do is plug that in. Port 1, please, Rob, if you plug in the WAN connection.
All right, there you go.
And here we go, link up, and we have our WAN connection. So you can see very easily auto-registered. There's very little involved in just actually how much is required to get this online and get this up. So we'll show you here, it's just plugged in. We have our router status online and our WAN link up, our 2 new counters to show us this here. Now, really, what one of the main strengths or one of the things that makes this so powerful or so handy is we show you if we jump over to our VLANs and subnets, this is all pushed out. We still have our VLANs, we still have everything here, so we don't have to go reconfiguring these. We still have all our descriptions, our names, our IDs, and everything, even the previous colors we've chosen for our VLANs. Now, all that's left is for.
So all the VLANs that I set up with the my third-party router that I had set up for all the presence parts, I don't need to recreate them or delete them.
You do not. No, we have these. They'll be pushed up from the NC100, so we'll actually have them auto-configured for you, and it's not required to be done by yourself.
Wow. Okay.
It's brilliant. All that is required now is that, as we say, it was the layer 3 what was being taken over by the router there. So that router would have been doing our DHCP. It would have been issuing out our IP addresses as we were our IP addresses on each VLAN. So what's left for us to do is configure these IP addresses again. Now, as we saw previously, we'll jump in and we'll configure our 103, our AHU. We'll configure this VLAN here now. So as we've seen previously, when we jump in, that's going to be our 10.222.103 VLAN. And as we've seen with Rob, when he was just configuring, or he was showing you how you set up your DHCP ranges or so, you have to create a DHCP pool. You have to create your VLAN. You have to point the VLAN to the DHCP range or so. Whereas here, we have our VLAN set up. We can just jump on our description, our VLAN ID is all here in front of us. And then we have our subnet settings. So here, once again, just really powerful in that it's going to really save us, not allow us to misconfigure. And we can decide how many addresses we want in this VLAN. We're going to go for 256 or /24. Then I might decide what sort of range I want it to be in. Now here, I don't even need to say the first IP address of the range. I can just say myself that if I want to do, we'll go 103, so it's a 103 range. I could even say 75 here. And what that's going to do is it's going to tell me what range that puts me on, what my default gateway is, what my subnet mask is. It's going to show me my CID or notation. And this can actually even be used as almost an educational tool and how it helps kind of show how these things can all relate to one another. And then we'll be given our usable addresses and the DHCP range down here. So if I was to be in a situation where I have to set up a DHCP range and possibly the first 5 or 6 addresses are going to be statically assigned for other devices, I can remove them very easily. And that's it, they're not going to be in the range anymore. Or possibly we might have a situation where it's not quite as convenient as that, and we have some IP addresses that are going to be kind of scattered throughout this range. But what I can do is I can actually take those addresses and reserve them here easily. So what I can do is if I was to do my IP config /all, and I'm to get my MAC address here, so what I'll do is I'll copy that. And if I was to take that address, we'll put it in here. We'll take the range of 10.222.103.45, let's say, and we'll reserve that. As simply as that's reserved, that's no longer going to be in the pool for us. That's going to be specifically tied to that MAC. Then we can save this, save our changes, and as you see here, very simple, very easy. We have that all configured now, and now that VLAN, that DHCP is ready to go. It's assigned to the VLAN. It's ready. It's up and running. So it is just once again very easy, very handy. I'll show you again here when we do 105. I'll make this one here, and I'll show you even how we can't misconfigure these. So we're jumping through again here now. We're just once again very easily making, very easily making these VLANs. We can see that as I put this down here, once again, this will generate for me. I have my ranges. And if I was to even try misconfigure, and I put in 1, I'm not going to be allowed. And you'll see when this tries to run here now, that's going to stop me being able to put this in. And it just really is, what it's doing is, as we said, it's not making you do things in multiple places, really reducing this risk of human error when we have to do something in multiple places. And
is that one, Thomas, is that one 105? Yeah.
Yes, 105, perfect. That's there. Just making it very difficult for you to put in the wrong, for you to put in the wrong notation there, and so we're going to be able to very easily configure it. And it just shows that it's kind of making it pushing out to each location, putting it out to every spot. You're going to be pushed out to all the switches and all on the router immediately, so we're not having to do this in multiple places. And you'll notice we won't even have to do this on trunk ports so as well. So what I'll do is I'll finally just configure up this last one here now, and then we should be good to show you our inter-VLAN communication. And there we have it. So as you can see, even as you just get used to doing it once, twice, you'll be able to fly through a lot faster. And basically just be able to configure these up nice and easy. So when we have these all configured up, and obviously we'll do that for all of our VLANs, putting them on the same range they've been previously, we'll then be able to have these be assigned. So we have our devices that are currently connected in and had previously been receiving DHCP from our router. our layer 3 or our third-party router, we'll then be able to have these connected now. And as you can see, these have all come online. We can see that there are devices taking these IP addresses. So we can, as Rob has shown then, the number of rules that are required for our inter-VLAN communication. That's going to be something that, the amount of rules that are required for our inter-VLAN communication is something that was going to be quite complex or quite tricky. Once again, it's something that will take a bit of know-how or a bit of certification to do. Whereas here, very simply, all we're doing when we go down, so we're going to see our VLAN that we want there, add, and who do you want to add, and allow communication between. Now, if I go for opt-PoE here, we can have that. And you'll see when I add different VLANs, if I add or remove, we have our opt-display is now allowed to talk to our opt-PoE. And when we then go and add another VLAN here, you can see that the opt-display is allowed to talk to opt-PoE and AHU, but AHU is only allowed to talk to opt-display. So we do have that availability to kind of pick and choose or mix and match on who's allowed to talk to who or how we're doing it. We can build this up or move this down more. We can add more if we need to be as well. And you'll see how very easy it is for us to allow inter-VLAN communication and for us to add it or remove it very quickly. Now, if we're wondering about these NA are not applicable here, that's because we haven't yet configured the VLAN settings. And as we say, we do require that IP address to be assigned before we can route. Before we can talk to the internet or before we can talk to devices on other VLANs, we will need that to be set up. So this is obviously
Thomas,
a very important feature.
For the ones that are NA, those are still communicating and routing on the old solution, right? The existing layer 3. So now only the ones that you set up the routes for, those are now communicating via the MikroTik, the one we added, correct?
Yes, they're communicating via the MikroTik now. And okay. The other ones, yeah, perfect, thank you very much. Yeah, so it's a very, very, very quickly, very handy, and you see how they just quickly swap over. And then for our allowing for WAN access, it's almost just as simple again. We're just going to be able to enable or disable with a click of a button, once again requiring that layer 3, requiring these IP addresses to be assigned in order for us. We can just save these settings here. And it is just very easy for, again, once on and off, and we're going to be able to allow that VLAN the WAN access in our to any VLAN as we want. And then we can come down and actually we can monitor our DHCP leases down here as well. So as we say, as IP addresses are assigned, we have a record of everything here, and we can connect everything up. We can have situations that we're going to, when we're moving stuff over, that we may want to keep IP addresses. So if we're going to have a situation, maybe we want to, we're not too fussed on which IP address is associated to which MAC, but we want to make sure it's consistent. We want to make sure we have a record that we're not going to have this changing. So what we can do is we can connect these devices as we've seen connected in here. And we can connect them, plug them in, and let them get them issued an IP address on the right range. And when this is then reserved, we can come down to here, view our DHCP leases, and we can actually one-click reserve. So what this is going to do when I click one-click reserve, it's going to take these bound licenses, these ones that are the ones that have just been issued and are not reserved, and it'll take these and reserve them temporarily. So we can do is then reserve these leases as we need to be, and make sure that they stay assigned permanently.
Will those show up, Thomas, on the top? Will those show up now in the settings up top on this display? Will those show up in the settings under the static leases now? If we look at that,
will they show up in the static?
Under edit, under the edit menu for AHU, for example? I think you reserved a couple there.
Oh,
when you were creating the DHCP range, yeah. So will those show up in that list as well now? Ah, okay, so they're there.
Yeah, so they will show up. Yeah, you'll have a list of all your IP addresses, and just a record of everything there. And also, just for troubleshooting purposes as well, you do have the availability just to click and ping, which I find personally, when you are just doing a bit of troubleshooting or when you're looking to do things, is also just another very handy feature. Just once again, reducing the amount of time that someone's going to be spending investigating issues. So what we'll show now then is just another way how these features, when they're working together, as we're saying, just really reducing the amount of times you have to do things in multiple places. We'll show as well how easy it is to create a new VLAN and how it is to sign this and push this out. So if we found ourselves in the situation where we have maybe a new technician or someone comes on site and we want to create a new VLAN for them, we want this VLAN to be, we want a new VLAN for them, we want this VLAN to be very, we want to be able to tailor it, so we're going to create a new one that we can have inter-VLAN communication as we want and we see fit to edit. So what if I decided I want to create a new VLAN called VLAN 333, and we don't have that VLAN connected? So as Rob had shown, it's going to be quite difficult for, or it's going to take a lot more effort for us to go create this VLAN, create our scope, and to put everything in. If I decide I'm going to create VLAN 333 here on our Optigo router, I can then connect in. I'll enter my VLAN, and I'll save my changes. What that's going to do is that's going to create that VLAN, as we said. It's going to assign it to the ports. It's going to make sure we have a DHCP range, and it's going to issue an IP address to any device now connected on that port. So when we switch back over, all we're actually going to see, so we're going to see our VLAN is here created. Oops, apologies. Nope, excuse me. We'll jump down. See your VLAN ID 333 there. So just make sure this is saved. We should be able to jump over. We'll see this in a few seconds. It may just take a minute now to load, and we'll be able to see our VLAN 333 loaded there. You should see that jumping in a second, and what we'll see is that that's going to be given an IP address, and that's going to be assigned. It's going to be given a range, and that'll be able to actually already issue and be able to start running momentarily. Apologies now, probably my connection may be a bit on the slow side from here, but should hopefully be able to load up again.
It says edge configuration pending. Let's see if it loads. Oh, yours is still refreshing.
Yes, there's a version there. Apologies, I know my internet connection is a little bit down at the moment. Should be jumping back up.
Let's see.
Edge switch.
You want to? Yeah, I went ahead and changed it just as a test. I changed it to 334. You should be able to see it in your VLANs and subnets. I just did a quick test for you.
Perfect. Shove it across there. Should be able to see it coming in momentarily. And we should see that coming in momentarily, hopefully now. But yes, so when it comes across, we'll have a VLAN. Yep, we'll have.
It's there. You might refresh. It's there on mine. Yeah, it showed up.
Refresh. Apologies now. It's probably my internet connection on my on this side here. Apologies for that.
Sure,
now.
No problem. You want to
refresh again there? Yeah, we're just loading up.
Refreshes for you. Well, it never happens in practice. Only live.
Exactly. Only in the live ones when the connections are there. And there we see 334, and you're going to see that IP address connected. Apologies for the delay there. I'll have to make sure my connection is proper. But yeah, we can see here all that we really have to do after we've connected that in is going to jump up. We're going to have that IP address range there. We can obviously edit that and tailor it as we need to be, tailor the size of the 1/24. But all we really have to do is choose the color after this now, and it's all going to be there for us. Once again, it's just making sure that we don't have this having to do something for each VLAN, have to do this multiple times, really reducing the risk, having to get something right and in multiple areas. And another thing we see here is we haven't had to come across a trunk port. So this is going to be auto-configured as well as we put these out. These are configured on all edges of the switches. They're going to be configured on all edge switches, our aggregator switch and our router. So we don't actually have to go configuring trunk ports to allow for these as well. It's all going to be pushed out and all done auto in the background for us.
So what would be Thomas, on the ports page, what would be the equivalent of the trunk port now, since we made this change? Where would all that be happening at? What port is it? Because before I had a specified trunk port for all this communication on port D5. So effectively, what is my trunk port now?
Well, your trunk port is going to be running in the background now. Effectively, that's going to be your MikroTik port or so you're going to have all your connections are just going to be running in the background. You're not actually going to have to manage this yourself. So you're not actually going to have to see it. It's all going to be all in the background.
So the D7 connection to the MikroTik, that's all the trunk ports are there?
Yeah.
Ah, perfect. Okay.
So just you only have to manage yourself. Sorry?
On an existing site, if I have a site with 16, 17, even 20 edge switches, do I need to have more than one MikroTik router layer 3, or am I fine with just the one?
No, you're perfect. So we can just have the one, and really it's just how much it is amazing how much extra functionality you get for even all that amount of switches with just the one device. Obviously, if there are more extreme complex or even larger ones that we need to handle, if it was very big, we could look at having other versions of their MikroTik which we can have incorporated into the one view also. But this MikroTik router will be able for really anything that we're going to be coming across here in our in our networks, this is more than capable of handling.
Oh, fantastic. So we should be good with one, even if it's a few thousand devices, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Good to go. Yep. So what we'll look at now is we may jump back and look at our comparisons. So and this device as well, so this router that we're seeing, this is going to be, is currently available. So we have this out in fields on sites places at the moment. This is available for you. It's just easily got from Optigo or Distech here. And it is currently available, so please do reach out for documentation or anything on these as well. So as we've seen there, just on our OneView system, or when we were going through our OneView there, you see that everything is in the centralized GUI, the centralized management system. So what it just really makes it a lot stronger, a lot easier for us to only have to control things from the one area. A lot of human error, a lot of misconfigurations, and a lot of wasted engineering time is as a result of having to go jump onto each switch, jump onto each device, and see both ends of your trunk ports, make sure that everything is configured correctly, and even one or two missed keys, you're going to have things kind of going down and not working correctly. So it really does just show how easy it is to control everything from this. We've configured thousands of ports on multiple switches from the one area, and we can manage these switches as well in a much more timely fashion. You'll see when we have those VLANs as well, we have the availability color code. Some of these might seem like small enough things, but when you're troubleshooting or dealing with a lot of VLANs, these visual aids actually become quite helpful. And it is very nice to just be able to have a GUI that makes things more intuitive and more easy to come across. With the router, as you see, we've only added a couple more things in, a couple more areas where we have made changes to the GUI. Still, for a lot of intents and purposes, it is quite similar. It is staying the same, but we are getting a whole load more functionality. We're just having those extra 2 counters on our router and our WAN there, router status and WAN. So if you have the router device itself connected, and then that has internet access. So 2 counters for that there. We then have our VLANs and subnets. We've previously been able to add VLANs and assign them to ports. We're now able to actually create those DHCP pools, those ranges. We're going to be able to assign them to which VLAN, and we're actually going to be able to decide which VLANs can talk to which or can talk to the WAN. So that's all going to be very handy for us to do. And as you can see, when Rob was doing it, just really a lot more intuitive, easy, and a lot less complex, or a lot less kind of messy when getting involved in it. So as we see, this is our MikroTik in front of us here. This is the one that Rob had just plugged in, that Rob was demonstrating there on our screens. So as we can see, we have our 2 ports, our WAN access and our aggregation switch port. We do say when connecting these up that we do follow the steps. We have these documentation. Please do reach out or so for configuring these and connecting these. When we do always try to kind of make sure we follow these steps, as we're doing a bit of auto registration, and we are doing some configurations in the background there. Please always make sure to connect your aggregation switch to port 10, and then connect your WAN access to port 1 of the router. Once that is connected, you'll be able to have your router online. You'll be able to assign your addresses, create your DHCP scopes, provide internet access securely, and configure paths between your VLANs and subnets.
And Thomas, once again, when you pull this out of the box, when I open the box with the MikroTik, when you order this, you pull it out of the box, you don't log into it. You don't configure it. You just plug it directly into OneView, and that's it.
Plug it directly into OneView, and it's good to go. The NC600 is going to keep all your configurations, so it's just going to push that out. And really, all it's left to do is create those DHCP scopes, those DHCP ranges on those VLANs.
What if I did accidentally log into it and configure it? Let's say I got motivated and I decided I wanted to play with it. What would I do? What would be the best bet if I did mess with it, or I had one that had been configured for some other purpose and I wanted to use it? Could I just do a factory reset and use it again?
Yeah, so you can do a factory reset of it if you need to be. You can also jump in. You can jump in and you can factory reset it and plug it back in and try. We can auto configure again. We can go in and also try configure if you wanted, but we would be maybe possibly looking at doing another one of these or something where we're going to look at doing advanced configuration. But if you go in, there's a lot of stuff configured here to allow the OneView and allow things to be incorporated to be this easy, and kind of obviously when we're doing one click, we're pushing things out. So in order to have this, you would probably be risking going in and misconfiguring something, so the OneView system may not work as well. So obviously just be aware of if you're getting involved, if you're going into that device, that there is configurations in place. But yes, we can just go in, we can factory reset that. We can use that for something else, factory reset it, plug it in, good to go again.
Absolutely. Okay.
So as we saw there, the steps to setting up our routers, you can just see with Rob as he's going through it, it's a lot of one by one. Now, obviously, we didn't take the time to actually do some of these configurations because it is a bit tedious. There's a bit of back and forth in it, but making sure that we have to do things one by one. So you see there, for every VLAN, one by one, set up DHCP one by one, assign things. So it is just one by one, making sure you're doing things correctly on both sides. You have to make, and just really taking it upon yourself to make sure you're doing things consistently and repetitively right. Where with the optical router, as you see, we just connect it and it auto discovers. We click create new on a VLAN or so, and that's all that it is to make one. We can just then assign, give it that name, that ID, and you'll see that DHCP calculator. So it's going to help you assign those addresses, set those ranges, make sure you're not configuring in a wrong range, or assigning a gateway or assigning a broadcast IP address to something. And finally, you can back up your system very easily. You can, with clicking a button, we're going to be able to jump in and just take a backup of that as per usual.
For that backup, Thomas, if I back up my system, I normally back up my Optico system, and I've restored it a couple times. If I back it up and the MikroTik's been configured, so all those VLANs were pushed out, all the DHCP ranges were pushed to the router, and all that stuff's handled, will I have to set those ranges up again if I restore a backup? Will I have to set any of the MikroTik stuff up again if I restore a backup?
No, if you have backup taken, you're going to be set. So all you need to do is get your devices back online, back working again. You can push that configuration back out. So you're not going to require to do these reconfigurations.
Also, even if I replace the router or I lose it, I can put a new one in there, or I damage it somehow, I can pop a new one in there and the backup will restore it.
And just as you've seen here, you're going to be able. This is going to be able to be configured again.
Okay, perfect.
So it really is a strong tool in that sense, and it really does just take away that the risk of kind of having to do things multiple times. So it is just a very much a router here that we're very, very excited in having, very kind of excited to get out there. Is really what it's going to be doing. Is it's going to be reducing just the risk of problems. What is kind of a big thing here, and I know it's for many people online at the moment or viewing, or say for yourself, Rob, is just reduce the risk of problems and having to do something multiple times. I probably maybe possibly put that number one in that. It's just something that reducing the risk of a problem is something that major, because a lot of the time it's the time and labor cost going into fixing a problem that may have just been a slight miss of error. Maybe you're doing something, as you say, 30 to 40 times, and all it takes is you hitting it once wrong, and then you have to go back and try find that. So it is just really making it a lot more difficult and a lot more awkward for us to. So it makes it a lot more easier and a lot more difficult, a lot more awkward for us to configure it otherwise, and really just a lot more easy for us to make sure we're doing it right and confidence, and just having that confidence in ourselves when doing it as well.
Yeah, I would say for Distech, it's difficult for us at a technical support level. It's difficult for us to support third-party layer 3 solutions, just because, first of all, there's so many on the market at varying complexities. So for this is great for us, because for those of you who purchase it and leverage it, we can fully support you now all the way into layer 3. So this gives us a way to kind of support you all the way to the router level, which typically before we attempt to help you there, but depending on what you buy, you almost always end up having to turn to an IT department or an IT guy to help you configure that. And this kind of gives you, for those, especially for those jobs that are simple in nature, that are very direct, and you're not trying to mix infrastructure, this is a fantastic solution. Simplifies things quite a bit.
Most definitely. And even just those one or two situations you might come in where you find that if you have someone you just want to assign a VLAN, as we say there, creating that new VLAN for a technician or so, that may involve logging a ticket with IT, may involve actually having to contact someone who has access. Even if you do have the qualifications or so, you might have access if it isn't your router, if it is controlled by IT, and having to just take that delay or that time for getting that assigned. Whereas here you see it's not really a risk. There isn't much risk of you misconfiguring it. So you can just take that responsibility and take that control. It's very, very helpful, and really, once again, reducing the time.
All right.
Perfect.
I think, Natalie, did you want to see, does anybody have any questions, or have any other topics we'd like to discuss?
We do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one, have you ever saturated the trunk port? Just curious what the limit might be in terms of Distech ECY devices and BACnet in general.
For the, are they, I'm assuming they're referring to the MikroTik solution with the, I,
believe so.
I can, from my experience, I've tested it with quite a lot of traffic, more than you would think, in my own setup and a couple others. And no, I haven't reached that point yet, not at the trunk port level, simply because the MikroTik is pretty powerful, actually, that model, and it has a gigabit port, and so it's pretty robust. And if you do think there's a risk of that on a very large site, there's always the potential to go with a bigger model. So the MikroTik router that is specified and we show in the presentation it's pretty powerful, and it'll handle a decent amount of bandwidth for what we would consider, even a large site. But there would be occasions where you might have security cameras and other things going on where you might scale past what you think that router can handle, and you could just actually then purchase a more powerful MikroTik switch. MikroTik's a great solution in this regard, since the OS that runs in MikroTik, it's the same across their entire brand. So if you go to the next model up, all the configuration will still work. The setup would be the exact same. So I don't know about Thomas. I don't know if you've had any issues or feedback from saturation, but I haven't seen any in my testing.
Yeah, no, no, we haven't come across it ourselves yet. I find that for most things that we would be dealing with or coming across in these networks, this MikroTik has very much been able to handle it. No, we've definitely kind of mentioned to people and said that if they are, as you mentioned there, if they are thinking they may be running close to saturating trunk ports or so, we can look at getting a more computationally heavy router or so. But for my experience up to date now, it's handled everything that it's dealt with.
We did have a couple of questions about whether this provides remote access or VPN connection.
So at the moment, this does not actually provide these. We're looking at maybe possibly getting this down as a new feature coming in sometime down the line, but currently it does not. We also can look at, as we say, trying to go in and have some other features going into the MikroTik itself. But as for the OneView GUI and configuring here, we do not have the capability of VPN at the moment.
Thank you both so much for joining us on this webinar and presenting all of this very helpful information. I hope it was very informative for everyone who's online today. Yeah, thank you so much for everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again on our future webinar. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye, guys.